I was walking through the kitchen, moving the way we move when our bodies know every tile, every step, every breath of a house. But something felt off, something was out of place, something was missing, the kind of missing that the heart senses before the eyes understand. And when I looked at the shelf, I saw it. My coffee filter was gone. The empty space screamed at me. Such a small object, so old, so simple, yet it carried inside it every morning of my life, every battle I fought with quiet courage, every cup of coffee I made to remind myself that I was still here, still standing, even when the world seemed determined to erase me. In that moment, I knew it wasn't just about a missing coffee filter. It was a sign, a warning, a wound I didn't even know was still open. And before any thought tried to convince me I was overreacting, that it was silly, that it was just a kitchen utensil, my chest answered first. It wasn't. It was never just that. Never. Because anyone who has spent a lifetime holding a home together, holding a family together, holding everything no one else sees, knows that certain objects carry stories, they carry memories, they carry pieces of us, and when someone touches them without permission, without care, without respect, the pain doesn't come from the object itself. It comes from the meaning only we understand. It comes from the place inside the soul that was touched without gentleness. It comes from the feeling that something that represented you was tossed aside as if it held no importance at all. And that's why I want you listening right now to write in the comments where you're from, your city, your state, your country. Because this story isn't just mine. This pain crosses borders. This truth crosses generations. This experience belongs to every woman who has ever had her story treated as if it were disposable. I stood there, staring at the empty spot, trying to understand how something so small could create such a big hole inside me. But it wasn't about size. It wasn't about monetary value. That coffee filter had been my companion on stormy mornings when I woke up thinking I didn't have strength for another day, but found in the smell of coffee a kind of invisible embrace. It had witnessed tears no one saw, smiles no one heard, hopes only God knew about. I remembered the times when, before the world woke up, I poured hot water through it like someone awakening a part of her own soul. It was a ritual, a symbol. It was my story. And suddenly, it wasn't there anymore. That's when a cold thought ran through me. Someone touched what they shouldn't have touched. Someone handled what was mine. Someone made a decision they had no right to make. I took a deep breath, trying to control the tremble in my hands, but my heart already knew what I would find next, because certain truths have a smell, a weight, a presence. I walked through the kitchen, the way someone walks through a painful memory, until my eyes found what I feared. The trash, the lid slightly open, and inside, like a piece of my life thrown away, was my coffee filter, crushed, dirty, mixed in with leftovers that had nothing to do with my story. And in that second, before I could even react, something inside me broke. It wasn't the object that had been thrown away. It was the respect. It was the consideration. It was the value of my story being treated as if it meant nothing. A heat rose in my chest, not anger, but a deep, old ache, the kind that lives where no one can see. Because when someone throws away something that represents your journey, the message is clear. What you lived doesn't matter. What you built doesn't matter. What you feel doesn't matter. And there, in front of that trash can, I came face to face with a truth I had avoided for far too long. The truth that some people simply cannot understand the weight of your struggles because they've never carried anything for you. People who look at what is sacred to you and see only an old object. People who confuse simplicity with uselessness. People who believe they can decide what has value in your life just because they think they know more, have more, or have seen more of the world. But no, they don't know, because they didn't live your story. They didn't feel your pains. They didn't stand up after the falls you stitched together with your own courage. And this is why this introduction needs to be told with raw honesty. Because what happened that morning wasn't an accident. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't a moment of distraction. It was disregard. Disregard disguised as tidying up, as, I just thought you didn't need it anymore. But anyone who throws away something that represents another person's soul isn't cleaning anything. They're revealing exactly who they are. And as I stared at that coffee filter lost among the trash, I understood that it wasn't the target of her disregard. I was. The pain I felt wasn't because of the coffee grounds or the worn fabric or the marks left by time. The pain came from knowing that this filter had held my life together during moments when no one else did. It accompanied me through days when silence weighed more heavily than any noise. It reminded me that even when everything hurt, I could still create something with my own hands, something warm that would soothe my chest for a few minutes. And someone thought they could simply throw that away, as if it were just old cloth, as if it were just a worn-out object, as if it were just nothing. The emptiness inside me began to shift into a kind of bitter clarity, a clarity that hurts, but frees, because there are objects that carry more of our soul than many people who live with us every day. And in that moment, as I tried to understand why this wounded me so deeply, I realized the answer was hidden in something I had been afraid to admit. It wasn't about the filter, it wasn't about coffee, it wasn't about routine, it was about what I represented to her. It was about the value she gave me, or rather, the value she didn't give me. It was about being treated like worn fabric, about being seen as someone whose story wasn't worth respecting, as if everything I lived through were nothing more than dust that could be swept away without warning. A tightness rose in my throat, a need to speak, to shout, to demand that someone repair the damage that had been done. But the truth is, there was no way to undo it, no way to go back, no way to restore what had been broken inside me in that moment. So I stood there, staring at the trash, trying to breathe, trying to understand how such a simple gesture could carry such profound violence. A violence without bruises, a violence without noise, a violence that doesn't leave marks on the body, but carves deep scars into the soul. And it's those scars that so many women carry without being able to explain. And as I looked at that scene, small to anyone else, huge to me, I knew that mourning would stay with me for a long time, not because of the lost object, but because of the truth revealed, a truth that rose inside me like someone waking up after years of sleeping. And it was only the beginning, because the story that was about to unfold didn't end there. That morning was just the doorway opening into something bigger, something I didn't fully understand yet, but that was already touching every corner of who I was, preparing the ground for everything that would come next. The emptiness on that shelf kept calling my name like a silent reminder of what I had lost, but the truth went deeper than that. As my mind tried to reorganize the events of that morning, I felt an ancient strength stirring inside me, as if that little filter, so insignificant to anyone who never needed it, held far more than anyone could see. The truth was that no one had ever seen that object the way I did. To most people, it was just stained cloth, a bent handle, coffee marks embedded by time. But to me, it was living. Memory. It was a witness to every time the weight of the world was too much, yet I still pushed forward. While others saw nothing more than worn fabric, I saw entire chapters of my life. Every dark stain was a dawn when I woke up early to work. Every loose thread was a worry I hid, so I wouldn't burden anyone. Every stubborn mark was a silent reminder of what life demanded from me, and what I gave without complaint. I remembered nights when exhaustion felt bigger than I was, but still, I got up and, put the water on to boil. Not because coffee was a luxury, but because it was my comfort, my liquid courage, my reminder that no matter how hard things were, I still had a reason to keep going. As the water slowly passed through the cloth, almost as if it filtered my thoughts too, I would promise myself that I'd endure one more day, that I wouldn't let life break me. And with that silent promise, I kept moving through time, facing crises, enduring pain, surviving absence. How many times did that filter hold what little strength I had left? How many times did it keep me from falling apart? How many times did it offer me, in the smallest gesture, the feeling that I wasn't completely lost in the middle of so much struggle? There are objects that carry soul, carry history, carry life, and my coffee filter was exactly that. An extension of everything I had lived and everything I had survived. Many people listening to me now know exactly what I'm talking about. They know what it is to have something simple, inexpensive, maybe even ugly to other people, yet filled with an entire chapter of their story. That's why I want everyone watching to write in the comments a sentence that says more than it seems. I also have an object that holds my story. That sentence connects stories, unites pains, brings together souls carrying more scars than they reveal to the world. Because when someone touches what is ours, they also touch what kept us standing when nothing else did. I spent years building my life on small rituals, small resistances, small hopes, and that filter was part of all of it. In the process of warming the water, of letting the smell of coffee fill the kitchen, there was a kind of healing no one ever noticed. On the days I had no one to talk to, that smell reminded me that I still had the right to exist, that I still mattered, even if no one said so. The world can be cruel, cold, indifferent, but there is something sacred in the rituals we create to survive. They remind us we are human, that we deserve care, that we have value even when no one sees us, and that filter did that for me. It was my daily act of quiet resistance, the proof that even when exhausted, I could still create a moment that belonged only to me, a moment of silence, of reflection, of strength. Every morning, as the coffee dripped slowly through the cloth, I remembered battles I faced in silence, pains I endured while smiling, nights I cried quietly so I wouldn't worry anyone else. And that is why, when I saw it in the trash, it felt like someone hadn't thrown away an object. They had thrown away my entire journey, as if my struggle meant nothing, as if my past were disposable, as if everything I carried, endured, and survived could be tossed aside with food scraps. It hurts to say this, but many people live exactly that feeling, the feeling of having their story minimized, treated as if it were light, when in truth, it weighs a lifetime. The feeling of having their memories ignored because they don't shine to the eyes of those who never needed them. The feeling of being emotionally dismissed by people who will never understand what it's like to survive with a heart full of responsibilities no one sees. I know the people listening to me now have lived moments like this. So leave in the comments another sentence that holds the truth of so many of us. My story deserves respect. A simple sentence, but one that rises from the deepest places in the soul of someone who has been overlooked for far too long. I stood there thinking about everything that coffee filter represented. I remembered mornings when I had to wake up before the sun, when my body ached but life demanded speed. I remembered the times I made coffee for someone who was hurting, trying to sweeten their pain while hiding my own deep inside my chest. I remembered the simple celebrations, the hurried smiles, the surprise visits where that coffee became a bridge between hearts. In every moment, that filter was there, silent, present, faithful. It never abandoned me. It never judged me. It never asked for anything. It was more than an object. It was a living chapter of my journey. And that is something many people will never understand. Because for those who have never needed to appreciate the little they have, everything seems replaceable. Everything seems disposable. Everything seems too simple to be preserved. But for those who built their story with effort, sacrifice, and endless endurance, every small object becomes a witness to an entire life. That's why it hurts so much when someone touches what is ours without permission. It's not a physical invasion. It's an emotional one. It's when someone crosses the border of our respect, our memory, our dignity, without having the slightest idea of how deep the wound goes. As I pulled the filter out of the trash with trembling hands, I realized that the gesture carried more than pain. It carried awareness. It carried an awakening I didn't know I needed. Because in that moment, I understood that behind every object we keep, there is a part of our soul still fighting to be acknowledged. And maybe that's why so many women listening to me right now are feeling what I felt. Because it's not about the cloth. It's not about the coffee. It's about memory. It's about identity. It's about being seen. It's about being respected. It's about refusing to let anyone, absolutely anyone, treat your story as if it were trash. And the longer I held that stained filter in my hands, the more I understood that it wasn't merely an extension of my past. It was living proof of my resilience. It was the symbol of everything I faced and survived, even when no one believed I could. It was the silent reminder of all the times I was my own strength. And realizing that was painful, but freeing, because at that moment, as I faced the truth with no filters, I understood that if someone didn't value my story, it didn't mean it had no value. It only meant they were incapable of seeing it. And those who cannot see the depth of a woman who has carried the weight of the world on her back do not deserve access to the light she carries within her. The filter was old, yes. Stained, yes. But every stain told a story only I knew. Every worn patch spoke of battles only I fought. Every mark was a living memory of how I survived days that should have broken me. In a world that dismisses what it cannot understand, that little object was proof of my journey. And what right did someone have to declare that my story didn't matter? What right did someone have to throw away something that stood by me when no one else did? What right did someone have to erase, with a single careless gesture, everything I lived through with so much effort? The answer was simple: none. No one has that right. No one has the right to decide the worth of our story. No one has the right to treat our memories as if they are disposable. And I knew that moment was only the beginning of a larger truth that was about to reveal itself. Because as I carefully cleaned that filter, feeling the rough fabric under my fingertips, I was also cleaning a part of myself that had been ignored, forgotten, dismissed. And that emotional cleansing, slow, deep, was opening the door to something even bigger, something I was just beginning to discover. As I held that coffee filter like someone holding a piece of her own soul, her image came back to my mind with a clarity I didn't seek but couldn't avoid. The woman who entered my life without asking, without learning my rhythm, without noticing my pain, without trying to understand the invisible weight I had carried on my shoulders for so many years. She arrived with that practical, fast, decisive way about her, the kind of demeanor people mistake for efficiency, but that to me felt like an urgency to erase everything that didn't fit inside her tidy little world, a world where the past is disposable, where stories are unnecessary, where memories take up space better used for aesthetics. That's how she saw my home. That's how she saw me, with that critical gaze that scanned shelves, judged objects, analyzed habits, but never considered the meaning behind the choices I made to survive the hardest days. From the beginning, I noticed she had no patience for anything that didn't shine. She talked about organizing, as if it were a sacred commandment, imposing changes the way someone erases another person's story with a swipe. She said I needed to throw things away, that my home needed renewal, that certain items were embarrassing. Maybe to outsiders, it would seem like nothing more than a difference in taste. But anyone who has ever been emotionally diminished knows that what hides beneath this modernization is something deeper. Disrespect disguised as caring, arrogance masked as concern, a lack of empathy beneath a speech about practicality. And that was exactly what she had been doing to me long before she threw my coffee filter in the trash, trampling my emotions while pretending to tidy up my life. I remember watching her arrange drawers as if she were evaluating my ability to exist. Her fingers moved over objects with a coldness that chilled me, as if her touch whispered, "This isn't good enough. This isn't useful. This has no value." And the worst part? She acted like she was doing me a favor, like I should thank her when she decided to discard something that, for me, held an entire story. She never once asked why I kept what I kept, never once asked the meaning of anything. She simply assumed that if something didn't make sense to her, it shouldn't make sense to anyone. And that's how small tensions began to creep between us, tiny cracks that might look insignificant to others, but to me, they were fractures forming in the place I called home. The truth is, some people enter our lives and believe they can reorganize everything without realizing they're disorganizing our soul. People who act like they own the space, like they have the right to alter what doesn't belong to them. I would watch her behavior and try to convince myself I was being dramatic. I tried to justify it. She's helping. She wants to make things easier. But there was something in the way she handled my things that unsettled me deeply. It felt like she wasn't looking at the objects at all. She was looking at me, measuring my worth through the things I chose to keep. And for someone who has carried too much responsibility for too long, that's a wound you don't forget. There were moments when she spoke about me as if I were someone trapped in the past, someone who didn't know how to adapt, someone who needed to get with the times. But she never understood that my memories weren't stubbornness. They were survival. They were roots. They were parts of me I wasn't willing to abandon just because they didn't match her style. And the more she insisted on this emotional Cleaning disguised as organizing, the more I felt like that relationship was a territory where I had to constantly protect myself, where any slip could be interpreted as weakness, where any explanation would be twisted. I lived as if walking on glass, choosing words carefully, avoiding conflict, trying not to show how deeply certain actions hurt me. People may think that's an exaggeration, but anyone who has lived through emotional dismissal recognizes these signs instantly. They come in looks that shrink you, comments that bruise, gestures that erase, and she had all of them, wrapped in politeness, always with that polite smile, as if to say, "I'm just helping." But I knew there was something harder behind her supposed good intentions, a discomfort with the way I lived, a criticism of what I represented, a constant attempt to erase my marks so the space would look the way she wanted. And when someone tries to erase what is part of your story, they're not erasing an object. They're erasing you. So I want you listening right now to write in the comments a sentence that hurts just to admit, "Someone once tried to erase my story." Because many women carry this wound, the wound of living beside someone who doesn't respect their roots, someone who treats as clutter what is actually memory, someone who treats as trash what is actually strength, someone who sees as old what is actually survival. And no one has that right. No one. I remember one day in particular when she walked into the kitchen with that inspecting look, like she was evaluating a workspace instead of someone's home. She began talking about updating utensils, replacing old items, freshening up the look. She spoke without stopping, without asking, without listening, as if issuing orders, as if my kitchen were a project in which I had no voice. I stayed quiet, trying not to start tension, but with every sentence she made, I felt she wasn't talking about objects. She was talking about me, about my way of living, my way of being, my entire story, which she judged outdated without knowing a single chapter. Our relationship was built on these silent collisions. She claimed she was only trying to help, but her actions said something else entirely. There was impatience in every gesture, control in every suggestion. She treated my choices like mistakes. And when someone makes you feel wrong inside your own home, that reveals far more about them than it does about you. Because people who love, respect. People who see, listen. People who care, consider. And she did none of that. She simply rearranged everything as if she were correcting flaws. And that's when I understood that the disrespect doesn't start the day someone throws your story in the trash. It starts long before that, in the way they diminish your choices, dismiss your feelings, speak to you as if your life needs to be edited to match someone else's preferences. She never raised her voice at me, never insulted me directly, never humiliated me with explicit words. But emotional disrespect doesn't need volume. It settles in the details. It shows up in gestures. It reveals itself in the way someone handles your things as if nothing there has value. As she walked through the house with that cold certainty, I constantly felt like, to her, I was just part of the scenery, someone useful, someone functional, someone convenient, but never someone seen, never someone deeply respected. And that feeling of invisibility is one of the most painful wounds a woman can carry. The pain of existing next to someone who notices everything outside you, but never anything inside you. The pain of being treated as if your memories were unnecessary weight. The pain of realizing that your scars are ignored by someone who only appreciates what is shiny and new, but never respects a well-earned shine from years of resilience. If you've ever felt that, write in the comments, "No one has the right to erase who I am." That sentence is emotional armor. It's a reminder that our story is not for sale, not open for editing, not subject to the preferences of those who never carried our burdens. And as much as I tried not to see it, the truth was there from the start. She wasn't just practical. She was someone who believed that everything that didn't serve her shouldn't serve anyone. Someone who confused modernity with superiority. Someone unable to see beauty in simple things. Someone who confused cleaning with erasing. Someone who confused organization with control. Someone who confused help with domination. Someone who, without realizing it, violated spaces in me I was still trying to protect. And it was that emotional blindness that led to the gesture that changed everything that morning. the gesture that revealed, without mask, without excuse, without softness, how she never truly saw me. And as I held that coffee filter against my chest, I knew that what she did wasn't an accident. It was revelation. And it is exactly here that the next part of the story begins. I was still holding the filter in my arms, trying to understand how something so seemingly simple could carry so much meaning, when the memory of that moment hit me again with a sharp, sudden force. The scene hadn't been dramatic or loud. No doors slammed. No fight broke out. No object fell with a crash. The deepest pain rarely arrives with explosions. It comes quietly, wrapped in routine. And that was exactly how I discovered the truth, that morning, in a silence that screamed louder than words ever could. I had walked to the corner of the kitchen to grab something completely ordinary. A bag of rice, maybe, or a dish towel. It was just another morning. But life has a way of using ordinary moments to reveal truths we spend years refusing to see. When I lifted the lid of the trash can, I wasn't expecting anything besides the leftovers from the day before. But what I saw inside took the breath straight out of my lungs. The coffee filter was shoved deep inside, crushed, still damp, tangled with food scraps, fruit peels, crumbs, crumpled papers, as if it belonged there, as if it were part of the house's waste, as if none of it held any story at all, as if entire years of my life could be tossed in that small space, meant for things that don't matter. My body reacted before my mind had time to understand. My heart tightened, my hands shook, and for a moment, I simply couldn't breathe. There are objects that should never be placed beside trash because they represent something far beyond function. And seeing that filter there felt like seeing my own soul thrown at the bottom of a bin, as if my life had become something that no longer served a purpose, something outdated, something disposable. The strong smell, mixed with yesterday's scraps, made me feel like I was witnessing a funeral no one honored, a grief no one recognized, because that wasn't just an old object, that was part of me, part of my endurance, part of my early mornings when life demanded too much, part of my late nights when only a strong coffee kept me standing while everything around me fell apart. Seeing that filter there, dirty, crushed, erased, awakened a scream inside me. But the scream didn't come out. It stayed lodged in my throat, like so many things I've swallowed throughout my life, so I wouldn't bother anyone, wouldn't upset anyone, wouldn't create conflicts that were never mine to carry. I looked at it the way someone looks at a shattered mirror. And in that mirror, I saw pieces of myself I didn't even know were wounded. Because it wasn't the first time something of mine had been treated with disregard. It wasn't the first time my choices had been disrespected. It wasn't the first time my worth had been ignored. But it was the first time life placed all of that right in front of me in such a blunt, physical, undeniable way. The truth, no matter how painful, always finds a way to show itself. And that day, it showed itself at the bottom of a trash can. As I stared at that crushed filter, an old memory rose inside me with a force that nearly brought me to my knees. I remembered the mornings when I made coffee while crying quietly, trying not to wake anyone. I remembered the times that cup was my only company, when loneliness felt bigger than the whole house. I remembered the days when each sip felt like swallowing courage. I remembered the smell that reminded me there was still life inside me, even when everything hurt. That filter had seen my struggle. It had witnessed my exhaustion, my desperation, my faith. It had held my routine together when the world was falling apart. And now, there it was, tossed away, erased, mixed with trash, as if none of that mattered. I reached out to grab it, even knowing it was dirty, even feeling the strong smell rising from the trash can. But my body moved on its own, because rescuing that coffee filter felt like rescuing a part of my dignity. It wasn't about cleaning an object. It was about cleaning a wound. It was about looking at myself with the attention I had stopped receiving years ago. When my fingers touched the still damp handle, a shiver ran down my spine. It felt like I was touching the physical proof that I had been erased in silence while trying to keep everything around me lit. I held the filter by the very tips of my fingers, trying not to let the scraps cling to my skin. But the dirt slid out through the sides and touched me anyway. And that touch, as unpleasant as it was, made me understand something I had never realized until that moment. When someone throws away what belongs to you, when someone treats your story like trash, the dirt inevitably splashes onto you too. Not because you deserve it, but because someone else's disrespect always leaves marks. And I felt those marks right then, as if life itself were showing me that it was time to stop accepting emotional crumbs, affection crumbs, respect crumbs. As I looked at the dirty filter in my hands, I felt a deep sadness, but also a kind of indignation I didn't know still existed inside me. A quiet strength whispered, "This isn't right. This isn't normal. This isn't about organization. This is about value, about respect, about someone who believed they could discard parts of me without even asking if it would hurt." And it hurt. It hurt in ways she could never imagine. I know the woman listening to me right now understands that feeling, because so many have lived it. They've had important objects thrown away without permission, memories treated like junk. They've been belittled by someone who never carried even half of what they endured. If you've ever felt this, write in the comments. I know what it's like to have my story thrown away. This sentence is a release, but also resistance. It's acknowledging that your pain is real, your past matters, your memories have value. As I washed the filter in the sink, feeling the water slide through my fingers, like an attempt to wash away the weight of that moment, I realized I wasn't just cleaning an object. I was washing away a truth that had been building inside me for years. The truth that I had accepted being undervalued for far too long. The truth that I stayed silent to keep peace with people who never cared about mine. The truth that I let others decide what could or couldn't be part of my life. The water beat against the metal, carrying away the visible dirt, but the symbolic dirt remained. Stuck in thoughts that had followed me for years. Because when you're constantly ignored, dismissed, erased, the body might adapt, but the soul protests. The soul demands. The soul screams. And in that moment, seeing the filter clean again, I felt my spirit awakening to something that would come later. Something I didn't yet fully understand, but that was approaching like an answer long overdue. I set the filter on a towel to dry and stared at it like someone looking at an old friend who has returned home wounded. It was there, hurt, marked, but still whole, still resilient, still mine. And maybe that was what hurt and strengthened me at the same time, realizing that what had been thrown away still carried enough strength to remain, enough story to exist, enough roots to survive the discard. And that awareness opened a space inside me I didn't know existed, a space where pain met clarity, where abandonment met revelation, where the wound met the warning. I knew, as I watched that object drying, that what happened that day wasn't an accident. It was a sign, a symbol, a prelude to what was about to unfold in my path. And it's exactly here, in this moment when truth begins to take shape, that the next part of my story reveals itself, bringing to the surface a past that insists on speaking when the present tries to silence it. As the filter rested on the towel, still damp, I felt it carried a calling from the quietest parts of my history, as if it were inviting me to go back, in time, to walk again through every morning when I rose with a tired body, but a soul determined to continue. The smell of coffee had always been more than an aroma in this house. It was the thread pulling me back to myself when the world felt too heavy to hold. And now, watching that filter that had nearly been discarded, I realized how coffee had, for years, been the only embrace available when no other existed. There were days when I woke before sunrise, while the whole house was still quiet, and the first sound that filled the air was the slow pour of hot water over the grounds. That sound, to me, was proof that I had survived another night, a silent confirmation that I hadn't given up, even when no one noticed the effort it took to keep my life standing. The filter held every drop like someone carrying the weight of a promise, and maybe that's why seeing it in the trash felt like watching a piece of that promise destroyed without care. I remembered the warmth of the cup between my hands, the comfort sinking through my skin and reaching corners of my soul no one else ever reached. Coffee was my confidant, my comfort, my survival ritual. It helped me face days when I barely had strength to speak, days when I had to keep going even when I didn't want to, days when the silence in the house felt louder than any voice. Many times I stood there, still, watching the steam rise and blend with thoughts I tried to organize. Each sip returned a bit of the courage life kept stealing from me. It felt like drinking memories Memories of who I was before so many responsibilities, before so many losses, before so much loneliness hidden behind automatic gestures. And I knew no one around me understood that. To them, it was just coffee, just another routine. To me, it was survival. It was strength. It was the only pause in the middle of silent battles I fought alone. There was a time when, between sips, I imagined what my life would feel like if someone truly saw my exhaustion. If someone recognized the woman hiding behind the role everyone expected me to fill. I made coffee while thinking about overdue bills, pains I didn't have time to feel, dreams I postponed because the urgency of the day always shouted louder than my own soul. And each morning felt like a repeat of the one before, but the filter was always there, steady, quiet, holding the weight of the hot water the same way it held the weight of tears I never let fall in front of anyone. I didn't cry while making coffee, but many times I felt the tears gather like the steam rising from the pot. And even then, the strong smell reminded me I wasn't completely broken, that something inside me still resisted, even when the world pushed me to the ground. So when I saw that filter crushed at the bottom of the trash, a part of me saw myself there too. A part that carried pride, but also wounds. A part that survived everything, but was tired of being treated as if her story meant nothing. There are things that hold our lives together when everything around us tries to tear us down, and no one has the right to throw that away like some old utensil. I remembered, with a clarity that almost hurt, the times coffee was my only emotional nourishment. The mornings when I drank slowly, trying to stretch out that comfort for just a little longer, as if prolonging that ritual could delay, even for a few minutes, the impact of the reality waiting for me outside. Coffee sustained me when no one else did. And that's not exaggeration. That's testimony. That's truth. There were days when, as I lifted the cup to my lips, I closed my eyes and asked God for strength I couldn't find anywhere else. There were mornings when my body ached so deeply that all I could do was breathe and continue, because the ritual of coffee gave me a sense of control over at least one small thing. There were moments when I trembled from exhaustion, fear, uncertainty, and the warmth of the cup brought me back to myself, back to a place inside where I could still recognize who I was. I clung to that ritual the way someone clings to a plank in the middle of a stormy ocean. It was that or drown, and I couldn't drown. Not then. Not when so much depended on me. Not when I was the only one who knew the battles I fought without witnesses, without applause, without rest. If you listening to me now have ever had a ritual like that, something simple that kept you standing when everything seemed to fall apart, write in the comments. I know the value of what held me up. This sentence is more than a confession. It's a bridge between all of us who learned to find strength in gestures no one else saw as important. Because sometimes our survival depends on things the world doesn't understand. Sometimes what holds us together is what others call nonsense. But nothing is nonsense when it saves you from yourself. Nothing is exaggerated when it keeps you from collapsing. Remembering that while holding the now clean filter felt like opening an old book to a page I thought I had forgotten. The cold early mornings when I rose before my alarm, trying to steal a few minutes of silence before the day swallowed me whole. I always turned on the kitchen light slowly, as if I didn't want to wake the house or the pains that slept beside me. At those hours, coffee was my only ally. The boiling water was almost a purification ritual. The smell filling the kitchen felt like a prayer without words, and the filter was there, holding everything, steadying my despair in ways no one else ever did. I also remembered the afternoons when I made coffee as an excuse to have a moment to myself, even if it lasted only as long as the water passed through the grounds. Sometimes I held the filter as if holding a piece of my own existence, because there were days when everything seemed to slip through my fingers. Opportunities, relationships, hopes, but the coffee stayed. That smell stayed. That warmth stayed. It was the only constant when everything else changed, and that alone made it more than a utensil. It was a symbol, a witness, a root. As these memories moved through me, I realized that no one could understand the value of that filter without understanding the weight I carried beside it. No one knew about my fears tucked into the corners of the night. No one knew about the tears I swallowed, muffled by the sound of boiling water. No one knew how many times I sat at the table with a cup in my hands, listening to my own, breathing, searching for any sign that I still had the strength to continue. No one saw, no one noticed, no one understood, but the filter was there, always, and that awareness mixed a deep ache with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Indignation. A kind of indignation rising from a place I thought had been erased. Because that day, seeing the filter in the trash, I realized the thing being dismissed wasn't an old object. It was my story, my strength, my fight. And that isn't something you throw away. That isn't something you treat like garbage. That isn't something you discard as if it holds no meaning. If you've ever felt your story disrespected like that, write, "My memories have value." This sentence is an anchor, a declaration, a reminder that no one has the right to minimize what once kept you alive. And as I watched the filter drying, I felt that memory of my mornings awakening something bigger, something silently gathering strength inside me, something preparing me to see, with clarity, what was happening around me. Because before any visible break, life always sends signs. And the sign that morning was impossible to ignore. The coffee that once sustained me still carried the deepest truth about who I was and who I was about to become. And it was exactly that awakening that would lead me to the next step of my story, a step revealing even more of what I had spent so long trying not to see. As the filter dried slowly on the towel, the metal still cold from the water that had run off my hands, I felt the weight of something I could no longer ignore. It wasn't only about the object I had rescued from the trash, it was about the gesture that had put it there, a gesture simple, almost insignificant, yet carrying a silent message deeper than any excuse could hide. When she told me she had merely cleaned the kitchen, my soul recognized the truth behind that word. Clean, organize, tidy up. Innocent words for most people, yet from her mouth, they were blades, wrapped in courtesy. She said she was just putting everything in its place, but that was exactly the problem. In her eyes, I had no place. My story had no place. My objects had no place. My memories had no place. And whatever had no place, she threw away. That's how she operated, with a polished coldness that almost passed as virtue. She walked through the house with that analytical gaze, examining every detail as if measuring how much of me she could erase that day. She never openly said I kept too many things or that my home needed improvement, but she always hinted, always. She commented on the color of towels, the wear of the furniture, the simplicity of my utensils, the lack of modernity. Each word seemed small, but its impact was huge. Someone who doesn't see value in what is ours doesn't need to yell to hurt us. Their indifference alone is sharp enough, and she existed with that sculpted indifference, dressed as good intentions. When I asked about the filter, she answered, with the casualness of someone mentioning something irrelevant. "Oh, that?" I tossed it. It wasn't any good anymore. As if she weren't talking about a piece of my life. As if she weren't talking about something that had been with me during countless quiet, lonely dawns. As if she weren't referring to an object that carried memories she never cared to know. Her disregard was so deep, she couldn't imagine the filter had value. Sentimental, emotional, symbolic, survival value. She threw it away, because to her, it was old, ugly, useless. People like her believe anything that no longer shines for them shouldn't shine for anyone else. The phrase, "it wasn't any good anymore," echoed inside me, as if she had said it about me, not the filter. Because deep down, that's how I had felt in her presence for a long time. That she saw me as someone who wasn't useful anymore. That my way of living was outdated. That my memories were exaggerations. That my habits were inconveniences. That my story took up too much space. And when someone sees you that way, anything that carries your essence becomes disposable to them. The filter was just the first thing I noticed. But how many parts of me had she already tried to throw away before? How many pieces of my identity had she rearranged without asking if it hurt? How many memories had she treated with the same indifferent, good intentions? I took a deep breath, trying to understand where that coldness came from. Why someone thinks they can enter another person's home and erase what they don't understand. Why the rush to destroy stories that don't belong to them? Maybe because stories like mine made her uncomfortable. Maybe because my simplicity exposed the emptiness she carried inside. Maybe because my resilience highlighted her own fragility. People who cannot face their own shadows often try to dim the light of others, and she did that every day, whether she noticed or not. As she talked about renewing, I heard the real noise. Beneath that word, the sound of masked disregard, the sound of invalidation, the sound of someone trying to shrink me using soft terms. She claimed she wanted to help, but her hands never touched anything without turning it into criticism. She claimed she wanted to make my life easier, but every comment made my existence feel tighter. She claimed she cared, yet never noticed how her behavior chipped away pieces of me. There is no real tidying up when the goal is erasing the traces of the person who lives there. No honest cleaning when the intent isn't to remove dirt, but to remove memory. I held the clean filter and felt the need to protect what still belonged to me. It wasn't about fighting for an object. It was about defending the woman I had been for so many years. It was about telling myself, even in silence, that I wasn't crazy for hurting, that I wasn't exaggerating for feeling, that I had the right to keep my own story. Emotional disrespect doesn't come in words. It comes in behaviors. It shows in the way someone handles our things, in the way they decide for us, in the tone they use when saying something isn't useful anymore. And the truth is, she didn't think the filter wasn't useful anymore. She thought I wasn't. She thought my life needed reorganizing to match her standards. If you've ever lived with someone who tries to improve your life by erasing your roots, write in the comments, "I know what it's like to be reorganized by someone who doesn't see me." This sentence is heavy, but true. It speaks for all of us who have been hurt more by polite smiles than by shouts, for all of us who have been diminished through care that was nothing more than control, for all of us who were treated as if we had no voice. As the towel absorbed the last drops of water from the filter, I realized that her disguised disregard had marked me more deeply than any argument could. Silent wounds sting the most. They are the ones no one sees, the ones that leave no bruises on the skin but carve permanent cracks in the heart. And she kept talking about how the house would feel lighter without old things cluttering it. But I knew what she really meant. Her discomfort had never been with the objects. It was with me, with my presence, with my history she couldn't comprehend. I ran my fingers over the filter, now clean, and felt the texture that had carried my exhaustion so many times. I thought about everything it had witnessed, everything it survived, everything it meant, and I couldn't ignore the truth. The object had survived everything except her indifference. The kind of indifference that doesn't look like much to the one who gives it, but has the power to break the one who receives it. There are people who speak of help while slowly drowning us. People who call it tidying up when in truth they are trying to erase us. Holding the filter against my chest, I felt the story wasn't ending there. Something bigger was being revealed. Something connected to the silence of recent months. Something I would need courage to face. Because behind the act of throwing something away, there is always a deeper truth. And that truth was about to expose itself even more clearly. As I held the clean filter in my hands, a heavy thought began forming inside me. It wasn't about the object. I had known that since I saw it crushed in the trash. The pain slicing through my chest didn't come from worn metal or fabric that had seen better days. It came from the invisible message it carried. Throwing an object away is easy, quick, almost thoughtless, but throwing a story away requires something colder, something harsher, something crueler. And that day, standing before that discarded filter, I understood what had really been thrown away. It wasn't an old utensil. It was my entire journey. Everything I represented for years. Everything I held together. Tired, wounded, alone. Because when someone sees no value in what we keep close, what we protect, what once held us up emotionally, they're not rejecting the object. They're rejecting the woman who held it. And that's what burned inside me. I sat down slowly, holding the filter against my chest like someone protecting a piece of her identity. The kitchen felt too quiet, as if witnessing a truth I had avoided for too long. I knew that discard carried a symbolic weight she would never admit. People like her always say it's just cleaning, just organizing, just decluttering. But what they call decluttering is often just their inability to recognize another person's emotional value. Throwing away what isn't part of their story is easy. because they never had to carry what we carried. They never woke before dawn to face the world with a broken heart. They never had to hold their own pain with both hands while smiling so no one worried. They never relied on small rituals to keep from falling apart. That's why they don't understand. And what people don't understand, they dismiss. That silent dismissal hurts more than any argument. I looked at the filter and felt all my exhausted mornings pile up inside my chest. It wasn't about coffee. It was about every time I rose when everything in me begged to stay down. It was about every time I breathed deeply and moved forward because there was no other choice. It was about every time I used the smell of strong coffee not to wake my body, but to wake my courage. That filter carried all of it. It was the guardian of a part of my story few ever knew, and seeing someone throw it away as if it meant nothing felt like hearing, without words, that my life meant nothing too. Because to some people, what doesn't shine doesn't matter. What isn't new is worthless. What isn't visible isn't valuable. And for years I lived exactly like that, seen by almost no one, shining only a little, worth almost nothing to those who never tried to see me. I took a deep breath and realized that pain had a name. Its name was erasure. Its name was invisibility. Its name was emotional dismissal. Its name was everything I had felt for so long that it nearly started to feel normal. Because when we live surrounded by people who don't value our story, we start believing there's nothing there worth valuing. Her gesture wasn't carelessness. It was confirmation, the materialization of everything I had felt but never dared to admit. Throwing the filter away was the same as saying my memories were useless, that my mornings were exaggerations, that my battles were too small to deserve preservation. And that hurt, because deep down I knew that to her I was just functional, never essential, never meaningful. As I watched the filter drying, I felt that revelation arrive like a deep cut, but also like a warning. The symbolic weight of that gesture spoke louder than any conversation we could have had. It said far more about her than any words she might speak. It said she didn't care to understand. It said she didn't recognize the worth of my existence before she arrived. It said her preferences mattered more than my entire story. And when someone believes that, everything we own becomes a target. Everything we hold becomes clutter. Everything we love becomes inconvenient. People like her don't discard objects. They discard bonds. They discard feelings. They discard people. And they do it disguised as cleaning. Part of me wanted to believe it was an unthinking gesture. But the deeper part, the part that had survived silently for me years, knew the truth. Nothing is unthinking when it represents who we are. No one throws away something they believe belongs to someone who matters. People only discard what they consider insignificant. And I realized, with painful clarity, that this was how she saw me, as someone insignificant, as someone replaceable, as someone whose story could be removed without consequence. But it did have consequences. Inside me, I felt this weight rising not to crush me, but to awaken me, understanding. What the gesture meant was like turning on a light in a room I had kept dark for too long. I wasn't just someone whose belonging was thrown out. I was someone who had been erased slowly, consistently, silently. Someone who had given up too much space. Someone who had shrunk her own history to fit inside someone else's standards. That realization hurt deeply. But it also brought a new understanding. I could no longer silently agree with being erased. As I scrubbed the last bits of dirt from the filter, I noticed something crucial. I had been doing the same thing to myself for years, trying to clean, smooth, soften, polish my own edges to become more acceptable, more easy, more likable, trying to adjust to what others expected, trying to be enough for people who never offered the same consideration, trying to preserve relationships that preserved nothing of me. And suddenly, seeing that filter clean but still marked by the discard, I understood something obvious and cruel. No matter how much I cleaned myself up, softened myself, reshaped myself, for some people I would never have value, because people who don't see us don't need a reason to dismiss us. They simply do. If you listening right now have ever felt that, being diminished by someone who never carried even a fraction of what you did, write in the comments, "My roots have value." This sentence is more than release, it's truth, strength, identity reclaimed. It speaks for every woman whose story was treated as clutter, excess, inconvenience, trash. I kept looking at the filter and felt there was something deeper hiding behind the pain. It was as if all my tired mornings were reflected on its faint shine, asking to be seen. It wasn't just the object that had been thrown away. It was my resistance that had been ignored, my courage that had been made invisible, my journey that was treated as insignificant. And when someone finally has the courage to face that truth, everything inside begins to shift. I felt that shift, slow but steady, rising inside me like an ancient whisper reclaiming its power. The filter was there, clean but scarred, and so was I, clean but marked. I knew the story didn't end there. That gesture was just the beginning of a larger revelation, a deeper truth I would have to face. Because when something of ours is thrown away with disregard, it's not the object being discarded, it's us. And that realization opened the door to a new understanding that was about to unfold. For a few minutes, I just stood there, staring at the filter as if it were something much larger than a simple household item. It was as if it stared back at me, asking how long I would let others decide what held value in my story. And in the quiet of that kitchen, I felt, clearly, firmly, that the time had come to do something I had avoided for years, to take back what is mine, even if it's dirty, even if it hurts, even if it carries difficult memories, because some things aren't rescued for the object itself, but for what rescuing them means to the woman we have become. I took a deep breath, held the filter more firmly, and felt my hands tremble, not from weakness, but from choice. It was as if a voice inside whispered, "Enough letting others decide what you deserve to keep and what you should abandon." I carried the filter to the sink with a care no one else would understand. The stained cloth looked worn by the world, yet in that moment I saw clearly that it carried my own marks too. Every piece of dirt stuck to it was a memory someone tried to erase without permission. I opened the faucet and let the water run over it, watching the dirt wash away slowly, as if each drop were cleansing pieces of my soul, long buried under years of emotional neglect. It wasn't about making the fabric clean. It was about washing off the weight that didn't belong to me, stripping away, layer by layer, the belief that I needed someone else's approval to honor my own story. As I scrubbed, the emotional impact of the gesture went through me. So many women listening now know exactly what that means. To take back something someone tried to remove from your life and return it to its rightful place. If you've ever lived that, write in the comments, "I take back what is mine." I continued washing it with slow, almost ritualistic movements. The strong smell of the trash still lingered on it, and for a moment, that bothered me deeply. But then I understood. That smell was symbolic. There were parts of my life I had also allowed others to throw away as if they were worthless. Small memories, small gestures, small fragments of the woman I was before I became everyone else's shelter. It was strange to notice that the filter had followed the same path as my emotional worth, ignored, erased, discarded, and still I was there, rescuing it with my own hands, as if saving it from the trash were saving parts of myself I thought I'd lost. And as I rinsed the cloth, another truth came to me. Dignity has no scent, no condition, no appearance. Dignity is recognizing that no one has the right to throw away what belongs to your story. If I left that filter in the trash, if I walked away pretending it hadn't hurt, I would be agreeing to something far bigger than the discard. I would be agreeing to the erasure of my own journey. And that I could no longer allow. Not after everything I had survived, not after everything I had carried alone, not after all the mornings when that filter held warm coffee, on cold days of the soul. I needed to pick it back up. I needed to clean it. I needed to keep it, not out of attachment to the past, but out of respect for my own life. When I finished washing it, I set the filter on a clean towel and watched it dry. Its marks hadn't disappeared. The fabric was still worn. The metal still showed signs of time, but now it was clean. And that cleanliness carried a meaning no one but me could understand. It wasn't clean to be displayed nor to be used as a symbol of perfection. It was clean because I decided that nothing carrying my story would be left to the carelessness of others. In that moment, My chest opened in a way it hadn't in years, as if a new light were beginning to spread inside me, whispering that transformation had already begun, even if I hadn't named it yet. I took the filter gently and walked to the cabinet. Each step carried a quiet courage. I knew the woman who threw it away would never understand this gesture. People who don't value their own history cannot recognize the value of someone else's. They tidy up by tossing out what they don't use, never realizing they might be messing with someone's soul. The cabinet was arranged exactly the way she left it. Everything symmetrical, everything sanitized, everything so clean it looked untouched by real life. A cleanliness that didn't embrace, an organization that didn't comfort. There was no memory there, only control. And I was done living in spaces where my heart had no room. I opened the cabinet and, with the firmness of someone who finally understood her own worth, placed the filter back where it had always belonged, not as an object, but as a symbol of my story, my resilience, my voice. I wasn't placing a utensil back in its spot. I was placing myself back into my life, the part of myself no one had the right to rearrange without asking. The part I had shrunk for fear of inconvenience. The part I had minimized to fit into the limits of someone who never tried to adjust for me. When I closed the cabinet door, I felt the power of that gesture move through my entire body. It was as if, in rescuing that object, I had rescued my self-respect, as if a silent message rose from deep inside me. I exist, I matter, I have value, and no one will throw my story away ever again. It was the beginning of something greater. Something I didn't yet understand, but could feel pulsing inside me like a promise of change, a promise that from now on, I wouldn't be a spectator in my own life. I would be the author, the keeper, the guardian of my own light. And if you've ever lived a moment like this, a moment when you had to take back something that represented you, something the world tried to discard, write in the comments, "I won't let anyone erase my story." This sentence carries the strength of all of us who were treated as disposable, yet chose to remain whole. Because reclaiming what is yours isn't regression, it's recognition, it's courage, it's dignity. As I stepped away from the cabinet, I felt my breath change. No longer the restrained breath of someone always avoiding conflict, but a full, deep, steady breath. It felt like reclaiming a space inside me I had let hollow out. And in that moment, in the silence of the kitchen, still echoing the aftermath of everything that happened, I knew something bigger was coming. Something that would show me that taking back what is mine has always been the first step toward discovering who I truly am. There was a different peace within me as I watched the filter resting in the cabinet, as if that simple gesture had rearranged not just a physical space, but an entire part of my soul. I felt a new firmness rising in my chest, a quiet certainty that despite the pain, despite the silences, despite all the times others tried to diminish who I was, my story remained alive, strong, lit. There was no more room for shame, guilt, or smallness, only for understanding, for strength, for clarity. Because it was right then that I understood something that would forever transform how I saw myself. My story was never trash. My story is root, is light, is life that renews itself even when others try to tear it out by the roots. As I walked slowly across the kitchen, still feeling the echo of what had happened, I realized that the pain which once paralyzed me now pushed me forward. Every memory, every difficult morning, every silent coffee, every tear shed without witness, everything had become a brick paving the way to the woman I was becoming. I wasn't made only of losses, I was made of resilience. And this understanding brought a deep calm, as if destiny itself whispered that I was finally seeing the part of the path it had always wanted to show me. The filter was just the spark. What was truly being returned to my heart was the courage to recognize that no one, absolutely no one, has the right to throw away what built me. I touched the cabinet door, letting my fingers slide across the cool wood. Funny how something so simple, so everyday, could now carry such an immense truth. It was proof that the value of things isn't in the things. It's in us, in what we endured, in what we overcame, in what we saved because we knew how much it cost to get here. And I realized it was time to say out loud what so many women never dare to admit. It's not attachment when the story is yours. It's not exaggeration when the pain is real. It's not drama. When the disrespect cuts your soul like a blade. It's truth. And no truth should be silenced for the comfort of others. I had spent years shrinking myself to fit into spaces where no one tried to understand me. But now, breathing in this new clarity, I saw that I never again needed to make small a life that had been enormous just to survive everything I survived. As I adjusted the chairs around the table, I felt a different presence in the house. It wasn't someone else. It was me, my own. Presence returning after years, hidden behind the expectations of others. I had spent so long believing my role was only to serve, support, understand, give in. And that's why so many thought they could toss aside my memories like worthless paper. But now I saw it clearly. Every morning I survived was a chapter of my strength. Every coffee I made was a reminder of my resilience. Every time I rose, even without strength, was proof of the light I carried inside. Light they tried to dim. Light they tried to ignore. Light I myself forgot to protect. But light that, despite everything, never stopped shining. Maybe that's why that moment struck me so deeply. Because rescuing my filter was more than retrieving an object. It was retrieving myself, my emotional dignity, my forgotten self-worth, my silenced self-love. It was understanding that even when others treat parts of our story as disposable, we have the power to reclaim, clean, honor, and protect what belongs to us, and no one can steal that power. I sat for a moment, letting that understanding settle inside me like a new foundation. My story is not trash. My story is struggle, memory, seed, flame that rises again from its own ashes. And as that truth filled me, a sentence formed in my heart like quiet poetry, like a private prophecy, like a declaration I had waited my whole life to say. No one throws my story away without consequence, because everything I lived became fertile ground for the woman I am now. And whoever tries to erase my past only causes my light to burn brighter. If you feel that too, if this story touched places in you that had been asleep, write in the comments, "My story has value." This sentence is not just an expression, it is an identity, a reminder of who you are and always were, even when others tried to convince you otherwise. A declaration that nothing, absolutely nothing, you lived was too small to matter. I stayed in silence for a few seconds, letting that new awareness take shape inside me. And then I realized that even though this story had reached an important point, my journey continues. Because every woman who regains her own light knows there is always more to discover, more to reveal, more to transform. And if there's one thing life has taught me, it's this. When one story ends, another opens, bringing new understanding, new truth, new strength. And that's why, before you leave this video, there is something important I need to tell you. There is another story waiting for you. Another truth, another soul unfolding with the same intensity, the same honesty, the same courage you found here. It's not a continuation of this journey, but it belongs to the same emotional universe that connects us, the universe of the matriarch secrets, where every narrative shines a different light on the life of a woman. Tap the video appearing on your screen. The light you found here will recognize the light waiting for you there.